Do you look back at your old work and cringe? Because I do. But today I'm going to take this shot that I made 5 years ago and I'm going to make it better. There are 3 main problems with this shot: the environment, the ship's animation, and the ship's interaction with the environment. And whilst we're complaining about things, to be honest, the compositing could be better too. The ship is meant to be landing in a clearing surrounded by a dense forest, but it doesn't look like a forest. To be honest, it looks like a collection of random dead trees. The trees in this original shot were made using Blender's sapling add-on. I'm sure it has potential if used properly, but the models I generated look awful, especially the leaves. Now, I could have spent a lot of time learning how to use the sapling add-on and trying to improve my tree making skills, but it's much quicker to use 3D models that have already been made by someone else. There are a ton of great tree packs available online, but they can get pretty expensive. So instead, I scavenged the internet for some free models, and I found a few good tree options on CG Trader and TurboSquid. In Blender, I scattered the trees using a hair-type particle system. I should probably learn how to use geometry nodes because they're better for scattering objects, but geometry nodes are scary. So I stuck with my particle system and distributed the trees using weight painting to create a forest clearing shape. Going back to the old shot, there's quite a few gaps in the tree line where you can see the blue sky. It's not helping the realism, and it's really not making the scene feel like it's in a really dense forest area. With the new shot, I used a trick I've seen a few other CG artists do. This sloping down plane lowers the trees at the back of the shot, and that helps to completely fill in the tree line, making the scene look nice and dense. The actual grass models in the old shot look fine. In fact, I really like the swaying animation. However, the grass just isn't dense enough, and there isn't enough variation. I'm pretty sure all the grass models are from one species. Looking at my reference images, the grass fully covers the ground and there's a variety of grass types. So this time round, I really cranked up the density and added a variety of grass models using the Grass World add-on. My computer wasn't happy about rendering this many models, but it looks more realistic. The last bit of environment work was the sky. This plain blue clear sky looks really boring. This new sky HDRI has a nice mix of blue sky and interesting clouds. There's even a cloud that looks a bit like a cartoon crocodile. Looking at the before and after of the environments, this is already a big improvement. Now, since I made the last shot, I have slightly updated the ship model, but the main issue with the original shot is the ship's animation. The first section where the ship flies in is fine, if a bit boring, but the landing sequence is not good. I tried to animate the whole section with a path, and the 180-degree turn at the end is way too fast. The movement of the ship is also very rigid. I still used the path to animate the ship in the newer shot, however I used keyframes to animate the landing sequence. I also gave the ship more of a sweeping turn at the beginning. A few rotation keyframes made the ship look like it was performing a proper banked turn. Much more interesting. Then as the ship lands, I added some swaying movements using some noise modifiers. I also re-rigged the ship so that I could control the movement of the landing gear from one empty. Time to completely break my computer. I give you the smoke simulation. The actual simulation itself was pretty easy. Big domain, a simple mesh at each corner of a ship to emit the smoke, and finally a ground collision plane for the smoke to interact with. Then I had to do a lot of trial and error to find the right settings. I keyframed quite a few parameters to get the fast, powerful smoke at the beginning, which then transitions into the slower, lingering smoke at the end of the shot. I would have liked the smoke to be a bit more detailed, but even at 150 subdivisions, I was dealing with so many crashes. In hindsight, I should have made the smoke domain much smaller. But something useful that I discovered from all the smoke simulation crashes was changing the compression mode of the cache. I found that by changing the compression method, which can be found in the Advanced tab, from BLOSK to zip, really helped reduce the number of crashes. Now the disadvantage of this is that the BLOSK compression algorithm is more efficient, so if you use the zip method then your cache will bake slower, but it does seem to be more reliable. And now we've added in the smoke, you can tell it's really adding some much needed movement to the shot, but still something's missing. I found found quite a few leaf models online, and then I combined them with the particle system to have leaves shooting out of the ground as the ship lands. There was definitely a more efficient way of doing this, as most of the leaves fell straight off the ground plane, and some didn't even make it high enough to be visible. Still, after tweaking the particle physics, I had my own convincing leaf storm. I also wanted the grass to react to the ship landing, but with how slow my computer was getting, I realised there was no chance of doing this in the main blend file. So I duplicated the file and then deleted everything except from the grass. Then I did a basic simulation using force fields. I found that combining a wind force with a turbulence force gave me a good result. By parenting the turbulence force to the ship's empty and animating the strength, I got a pretty good result. I rendered it with the ground plane disabled and with the background set to transparent so I could composite the grass into the main shot later. The original camera movement was okay, but I don't think the camera needed to travel that much. If anything, it distracts from the main important part of the shot, the ship landing. So whilst I used a similar push-in camera shot, I had the camera move much slower and not over as much of a distance. I wanted to make the tilt up when the ship lands more noticeable, as I think it helps the shot look more powerful. I found it's usually easier to control the direction of the camera with a track to constraint than by manually keyframing the camera. So I tracked the camera to an empty, then animated it to follow the ship down. To make the movement feel more realistic, I did a bit of noise to the empty to get some subtle camera shake. To finish off the animation, I used a couple of glare nodes in the compositor. I've done quite a few sci-fi shots recently, and I found that using 2 glare nodes, one at medium quality and one at high quality, can give the render nice bloomy highlights, and that can really help accentuate metallic textures. Setting one of the glare nodes to a low threshold value can make the effect even more extreme. As this scene ended up having so many models and physics simulations, my preview renders were getting longer and longer. Luckily, I own a rendering business, Graded Blue Render Farm. I zipped all of the simulation caches along with the blend file and used the exceptionally user-friendly interface to upload the project. Whilst this is rendering, very cheaply, as Graded Blue Render Farm is the most competitively priced online rendering solution, I had one more look at the original shot. I already had this shot where the ship drops out of hyperspace and flies towards the planet. I had assumed I'd cut straight from this to the ship landing, but it felt too abrupt. I already had all of the assets I'd need, so I created a new plane, used proportional editing to add some mountains, then I added the tree particle system in. A few follow path constraints later, and this aerial drone style shot was ready to go to the render farm. I had one more shot idea, a handheld style shot, seeing the ship flying through the trees. So I created another flat plane, filled it with my tree particle system, and positioned the camera on the ground looking up. After a bit of experimenting with tree and camera placement, I had a really good shot of the ship flying through a gap in the trees. Finally, I added some swaying movement to the trees using a simple deform modifier. I set the deform mode to bend and then animated it using some noise modifiers. I also added some noise to the camera and to the empty that the camera was tracked to. And once again, the shot was ready to be rendered. After everything was rendered, I downloaded the files from the render farm and brought them into DaVinci Resolve. The grass render was slightly too bright, probably because there weren't any trees casting a shadow, so I lowered the brightness of the grass a little bit to match the shots together. I did a bit more masking to really tie the grass into the scene. Finally, I adjusted the colours slightly and added some halation using the film emulation plugin Dehancer. And finally, the shot was finished.